Well, I'm Steve Wozniak, and I'm one of the co-founders of Apple. I was the engineer, often credited with starting the whole PC revolution. I knew that I was the best digital designer in the world, long before Apple. So I built a version of Pong. Didn't design my own game, just made my own Pong, 28 little $1 chips. Steve Jobs came into town from out of state. He took this one, ran down to Atari and got a job with them. They might have thought he designed it or he largely designed it, but he didn't have that ability. I was in the Homebrew Computer Club. I was too shy to speak, but I could, if somebody asked technical questions, I could always answer. So I'd set it up and I'd show people, you can type this in here, and it had cause a bunch of things on the screen to happen. There was a crowd that would look over my shoulder. Now, Steve Jobs didn't know it existed. I wanted to help start this revolution, so I passed out all my designs for free. So Steve Jobs coming finding me in a basement. I took him to the club to see the interest. He saw all the people around me interested that my computer was so much different than the ones with switches and lights, the old mainframe style. And that's when he said we should start a company. My product, the Apple II, was the only money Apple made for the first 10 years. There would not be a company without my product. That was it. That's what made the company. Just put me in a back room. I want to keep designing products for Apple. And Steve Jobs wanted to be very famous in the world from his early days. So he took over the role and presented himself to the press as the brain of all personal computers. Steve Jobs didn't want me around because I might be competition to him. So he had me moved to a far off, way down the hallway, a little office smaller than the building area we had. But he kept trying to come up with computers of his own. Here's what the world needs. And the Apple III failed, the Lisa failed, and the Macintosh was our hardest failure ever. Almost sunk the company. Startups create new types of business that didn't exist before. If you're really tight into it, it's the hardest work in your life, hardest. But when you look back, it's the most fun you ever had in your life.
If you could say one thing to Steve, if he was in this room with you today, what would you say to Steve Jobs?
Well, I'm Steve Wozniak, and I'm one of the co-founders of Apple. I was the engineer. I'm often credited with starting the whole PC revolution. But, you know, my background, I had this incredible background with an engineering father, and he guided me into science fair projects, things that are outside of school, and got me into electronics, and I learned all the formulas and built devices at home. And a lot of people do that, but I got a ham radio license by 10 years old. I mean, you have to study all the formulas of how electrons flow through different materials. You have to study a lot of the ways ham radio works. Back then, you built your own radio. I had hundreds of parts, connecting them together with a soldering iron to make a transmitter, hundreds of parts to connect them together to make a receiver. They all came as just kits. And I could go on and type on a telegraph key in Morse code. And so I knew I was going to be an electrical engineer. My father said, "What do you want to be in life?" I said, by sixth grade, I said, I want to be an electrical engineer first, and second, I want to be a fifth grade teacher, like Miss Scrack. That's a teacher for 10-year-olds. That meant teaching education was a very high value to me by then, largely came from my father. But he would teach me he would help me progress in my science fair projects through electronics, and then I discovered digital. Nobody discovered digital. Nobody. There were no books in a bookstore. There were no magazines about computer type stuff. It was just far off research, military, and you couldn't really get anything. And I found a journal by accident, and it just turned my life around. And I said, I love adding these little ones and zeros the way computers do. I learned how to do it. And I love these logic gates that are like philosophical logic, making decisions, and you can combine a few little small decision makers to make bigger decisions like adding numbers. And I made science fair projects that got me so much acclaim and awards. And so I was well on my way. But the thing is, I would never be able to build a computer. When I graduated high school, I thought, even if you go to a college like MIT or something, engineers don't build computers. I thought that's for some weird computer people in research places and things, but engineers just build radios and televisions. I knew all the formulas for radio signals and how to build them, and led me to some good pranks on occasion. I loved combining the humor of knowing electronics when other people don't. You could always play little tricks with electronics, and nobody, not even teachers, would know what was how it could have been done. So it was humor was a huge part of my life. And, I don't know. I knew that I was going to be a good engineer, and I knew that someday I wanted to be a good teacher and humor. And I knew that I'd always be into humor. So I didn't know I'd be able to speak. I was very shy from about 11 or 12 years old on, and I had almost no friends. And that helped. Why? It gave me a lot of time after school, sit down in my bedroom and start working on how would I build these things? How would I make a computer, knowing very little about the lumber that was available, chips. I mean, I had to actually, to even get information about computers from computer companies. How do you get a manual for a computer in, 1970? How do you do it? Uh, Stanford Linear Accelerator was the top physics research place in the world then. And the smartest people in the world don't lock doors. And so I would drive into Stanford on a Sunday, and at least one door would be unlocked to the main building. And I'd get up to the second floor. They had a library. This is technical stuff you couldn't find in a library that normal people went to. And things about computers, and I could send away to companies and get their manuals and everything. That was, basically it was rules. Rules are good guides and you should follow them, cross the street at a corner, but a little bit of pushing the system to educate yourself is really worthwhile.
Tell us about some of the notable pranks that you did in your early days.
Notable pranks, so many that it's hard to remember. I always think of one I pulled in high school where you had to get notices read to the entire school every day. The vice principal had to approve them. But I made one up and it said, in a certain room at a certain time, Stanford's head janitor would speak on higher custodial education. And it got in. The kids would laugh and the teachers would say, hey, no, don't laugh. That's really serious stuff. They make good money. That was one. But I did pranks like making doors unopenable on occasion, or telling people to wire their radios the wrong way, so I kind of blew their radios up in electronics class, and just anything I could think of. Did that all my life. After that, throughout my life, I've done a lot of pranks that took a lot of time, like weeks, or a lot of money, and unusual. I like to do the unusual things people wouldn't expect. And the trouble is, I've got 100 I could list, 100 pranks, and every one I could say is my favorite today. So that just became part of my life, humor. And I came up with the philosophy, since I was kind of good at it, you should always have fun in everything you do. If you're working, doing something productive, you should be able to joke with your friends, your co-workers, and always try to make fun and jokes and things like that. The trouble is, not everybody does it. Some people might be humorous, but also some people might be great engineers, but not inventors. That's part of a personality that when you talk to people, you know if they're an inventor or not. You know if they're a prankster or not. And you know it pretty early just talking to them, getting a flavor for their personality. Your personality settles down somewhere between 18 and 23 years old. That's who you are. That's how you're going to treat life. That's how you're going to deal with things the rest of your life. You're not going to change. As much as you decide you want to try, you won't be able to. I was a psych major, so.
Give me an example of when you bended the rules.
Bended the rules? I think every single prank you ever play, trying to trick somebody.
Maybe more and less of when it came to your inventions, when it came to your ideas, there's a predefined system of you need to do this, this, and this. When did you break out of that norm and say, no, I'm going to figure out my own way?
Well, pranks are trying to do something very abnormal, okay? Something unusual that you'll be able to laugh at. And great designs are doing things to me. I became doing things very unusual, not the way it could be taught in books even. Not the way. You had to figure out, look at structure and really understand it. One of the great ones was my blue box design, which is sort of famous. 1 year at college, and I figured out how to build this little blue box to make tones into an American phone, could make calls to anywhere in the world. I called Sydney for Sydney Dial-A-Joke for free. The phone company had the flaws in it, and they don't fix them, fix security until it gets detected. Who thought you could put the right tones into a phone? And but the design, certain chips with certain wires. I actually did probably the best job of my life of all my designs for cleverness. unusualness and made it the fewest parts and the simplest little design. But there were some wires that went into some chips that have inputs and outputs. And everybody understands the inputs come in and that develops the outputs and makes it work. So I'd put in the right inputs and it would make the right tones. But those inputs, I knew how the chips were wired inside. I knew all their little parts inside, resistors, transistors, and how they work. And so I actually knew that even where it's called an input, some electrons have to leak out to make it work. And I used those electrons that leaked out into a transistor arrangement that actually provided power to the chip. How does the chip do that without power? If you know how it's wired inside, you know what'll work. It's just the strangest thing in the world, using an input as an output that turns on the chips. And it just worked as beautiful. The absolute minimum parts. All my designs, I got so good at designing things, a computer that came out, and then I designed the computer over and over, and I think, is there any way I can save parts? Always try to get the minimal parts, the most direct, because another engineer would look at it and say, oh, it's so understandable. There's very few pieces. Normally it would be, most people would design things with at least twice as many pieces as I would. Sometimes, for example, if you had to count from 1 to 60 for some reason, there are counters that come out and you put in the standard signals to count from 1 to 60, but then you have to detect when it hits 60 to restart it. That's a whole bunch more chips and comparisons, or this equal that and that. I just did a different thing. I fed in on wires the number 60 and counted downwards. Or I would start with 256, the endpoint of the chips, and I would count them upwards from 256 minus 60. When they hit the end, they put out a little signal saying, I'm at the end, and you tell that signal, reload the number that you're starting with. And these it just like cut the numbers of chips, on some cases down to half or a third. But I just did that in all my designs. And it was all in my head. I didn't have to think about it after a while. But here's something more important. I might do a tricky design, and you think, oh, you can repeat this trick that worked so well. No. The important thing was I knew how to create tricks on the fly. Every project was its own. Every project was not just another copy of something else. It was exactly its project. How do I make this one the simplest circuits, the fewest number of chips? Don't try to reuse something I had before. And I got so good at thinking out little ways around. For example, I'll have to add a chip to get something, what's called an inverter that takes a plus in and puts a minus out, or a minus in plus out. It reverses it. It's called an inverter. I'll have to add another chip. Then I'd say, but I have a spare little holding spot, one bit of memory over here. And the memory has both a plus and a minus output, and figure out a way to use it, and it solves the job. So I didn't have to even add a chip. I did an inverter with a part that wasn't designed to be an inverter. So very frequently my designs would involve, and this is before Apple, they would involve using chips for things they weren't intended. The manufacturer of the chips intended to do certain thing, like counting. I might discover a counter just puts out some signals. If you put a little twerp around, make it recount at some point, it would come out with some little signals that have timing that can operate dynamic RAMs in a computer. I don't know where this comes from. It could never be written in a book, but being able to find tricks on your own, it was just, I knew that I was the best digital designer in the world long before Apple. But because my circuits would often be half as many chips as the manufacturer for a computer. I didn't ever build one. I couldn't afford a single chip, so I designed them on paper. But I knew I must be the best, but I never said that I was the best, because there can always be someone equal to you. Everything you've done, somebody else could have done the same things. Theoretically, they could be better too, but my tricks were just never, you couldn't write them in a book, and they saved parts.
Walk me through 2 months before Apple started. What were you doing?
Well, really, everything leading up to Apple was 10 years before Apple, my whole life. But 5 years before that, I met Steve Jobs, and I had got an executive to donate me some chips for free that I could never afford. And I built a computer of my own design and called it the cream soda computer. And that's when I got introduced to Steve Jobs. And when I first met him, he was young, 16 years old. So he didn't have any albums. And I took him to my house and I showed him all the Bob Dylan albums. There were about 5 at that stage. And looking at the liner notes and the interviews with Bob Dylan and the lyrics to strange lyrics. How does a human being think up these words? It became a huge part of our life. So Steve and I together went off trying to track down Dylan memorabilia, going to concerts, the whole deal. That was a big part of our life. And this was Steve Jobs zero. He was a normal person. He could be a prankster, but he was really kind of just trying to be have nothing hippie. Just drink seeds and go barefoot, or eat seeds, carry a bag of seeds. And I admired that, but I wouldn't do it. But I had no friends. Steve understood my genius for designing computers and respected it. Oh my gosh, that's my best friend in the world, somebody who actually knows who I am. I couldn't talk about computers with anyone at school. Nobody knew what they were, but he appreciated electronics and he could see my greatness. So we became best friends in my technical life, and just talking about doing things. And we did the blue boxes. he was always interested in what could make money. From the day I met him, he spoke of the important people in the world: William Shakespeare, Isaac Newton, and how these people moved the world forward. So I knew that he wanted to be one of those people, but he didn't have the academic background, because we went to the same high school in different years, and he didn't have my teachers, and I had all the high up ones. So he was, I guess, low down academically, but big deal. And we were best friends. I drove him off to college in Oregon, and visited several times, and we played pranks. We played pranks on each other and pranks together. Just a normal, laughing, fun Steve, not at all like And he got in with a whole bunch of other Hare Krishnas or whatever that wear the colored costumes and go around asking for money in airports or whatever, or stealing incense from a store and then selling it back to the store. Those kind of things. I don't know what's in his book. I've never read it. I figured I was there, so I don't have to read the books. Anyway, Steve Jobs and I are going along, and I've got this idea. I'm always watching. Is there a way that I'm going to build the computer that I told for myself, that I told my dad about? Input, output is so much more expensive than the processor, so much harder to do. And then one day I saw a Pong in a bowling alley. And I said, oh my gosh, a TV can be the output. I was a skilled engineer. I was a skilled TV engineer. I could have repaired TVs back in the days when you had TV repair shops. Oh my gosh, I knew how digitally to create the signals that would put balls and paddles onto a TV. So I built a version of Pong. Didn't design my own game, just made my own Pong. 28 little $1 chips. I always made things as small and inexpensive as possible. And 2 of the chips would put up a 4-letter word when you missed the ball. So if you missed it, it might say heck or something. And Steve Jobs came into town from out of state. About once a year, he'd come in town and turn whatever I had into money, my latest invention. He took this one, ran down to Atari and got a job with them. And they might have thought he designed it, or he largely designed it, but he didn't have that ability. So then I actually wound up through him. He worked a deal. Nolan Bushnell, who ran Atari, wanted a 1-player Pong game called Breakout. And Steve described it to me. Could you do this? Oh, I'd love to. Build a game that young people will want. Young people in their schooling age, that would be the most important people in my life, to build a game that they would play and it would be mine. So I said, yeah. And he said, there's a hitch. You have to do it in 4 days. Huh? Yeah, even I, the best designer in the world, I don't think I can do that in 4 days. I did not believe I could. Went 4 days and nights with no sleep doing it, designing it. Steve would go in, Steve would breadboard it up at Atari at night, but it was all my design. And I'd find the problems, fix them, redo it. And so we designed Breakout for Atari. I designed Breakout, all my design. And became a huge hit game. My design cleverness was such that Atari couldn't understand it. It wasn't normal. See, I don't design things the normal way, and they didn't know how to test it. If they'd had me, I could have shown them exactly how, but I think they only knew Steve Jobs. I think they paid him, and he paid me half of it, supposedly. 12 years later, I found out in a book that he'd been paid a lot more than he told me. I would have said, you can have all the money. I don't need it. I got an engineering job, and I'm like that. He needed the money to buy into a commune up in Oregon, I believe. So he's up in Oregon. Anyway, we're going on, and I've solved output. An output device for a computer can be a TV, because a TV's free. Why? I have a color TV in my apartment. I can take off the back of the TV, scope around with equipment, and figure out where the signals go in that make the TV show balls and paddles. And then I was over at a friend's house, John Draper, known as Captain Crunch, from the Blue Box days, phone phreaker, one of the key phone phreakers. He was in a lobby in a basement doing some engineering, and he was on a computer. And he said, "I'm playing chess with a computer in Boston, across the country." And this is early 70s, 72 maybe, 71s, maybe even before that, 70, 73, 74. He's playing computer, and he says, I found there's this thing called the ARPANET. You could dial one free number. It's SRI, Stanford Research Institute, and it puts you on a network that your little output device, a teletype in those days, would display 6 computers. There were only 6 computers on the whole ARPANET that is now today's internet. It was MIT and UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, University of Utah, a couple others. So here we are. I had to build a device. If I saw something interesting in life, I went there, and I had my design skills, and I would go design it. I even had a reputation while working at Hewlett Packard later on that I would design anything for people all over California. They'd come to me with incredible projects like the first hotel movie system in the world, and I'd get to design it, and I would charge them 5 cents. When you do something you love, that's how I was. I don't have to try to charge them an arm and a neck. So I had this device that I could type on. What I did was I designed the circuitry that put letters on my TV set, words on my TV set. And I could type on a keyboard, the most expensive thing I ever had to buy, all the way to Apple. The $60 keyboard in those days, like $600 today, just for a keyboard. And I had to get the lowest level one, didn't even have uppercase, didn't have upper lowercase. And I'd type on a keyboard, and through a modem I built, it would send signals into my phone line to the ARPANET. And then I could make decisions, and I could log on to any of these computers. I could log in as a guest and read files. And nobody did this. See, I'm doing something nobody knows about. And I could run programs and things like that. And so that was sort of the input-output phase. Now, Steve was out of town after that, so he wasn't around. And I went to a club. I had no idea what it was. My friend Alan Baum said, "This is a club of people who want to build terminals and things like that." I already had a terminal, a TV terminal that you could afford and build in your own house and talk to faraway computers, timeshare computers or the ARPANET. And so I already had that. And the first night of this club, I found out that people were interested in these new upcoming microprocessors. Microprocessors had been around a couple of years, but 2 years before that, I looked at a microprocessor and studied it. It could never build a computer that could do something useful. The computer that I told my dad I'd have someday couldn't be done with the Intel 4004 4-bit microprocessor. But they'd gotten up this 8-bit one, and that night of the club, everybody was interested in a little computer called the Altair. It had switches to put in ones and zeros, and it had lights to display ones and zeros, and buttons to put things into memory. And that was the exact same as the cream soda computer I had built 5 years before. Switches for ones and zeros, lights for ones and zeros. I had already built that. I was 5 years past that. I was working for a company, Hewlett Packard, building calculators. They were human. You press a 5, see a 5 in the display. Humanness. And I also had my ARPANET terminal. First night of that club, I said, I wonder what these microprocessors, what they're like nowadays, now that they've grown up. And I took home a data sheet, and I said, oh my God, these are like the processors I used to design day and night in Cupertino, every weekend, sitting down designing them. I said, this is the formula. I got a processor, and that's the brains, and I'll choose the right kind of memory. Everybody else was choosing the wrong type that cost 4 times as much. But I chose the hard, what's called dynamic memory that required extra chips to get signals in, because it forgets every bit it has every 2,000th of a second. So you've got to get in, somehow refresh every little bit on those chips, but they were 1/4 the cost. So I designed my, well, first of all, I had the terminal already. I said, instead of talking to a faraway computer, let me put the computer on my board, my display and keyboard electronics. And so I put the microprocessor on for the brains and the memory for memory. And all of a sudden, I could type things and I could run programs. I started writing a programming language. Bill Gates and Paul Allen had introduced basic computer language for the other types of computers. I chose a microprocessor that they didn't use because I had no money. I couldn't afford a $400 Intel microprocessor, and Motorola, I could get one for $40 being an HP employee, but I found one for $20 being sold over the counter at a show in San Francisco, and I bought it. 6502. It's become a very, very famous processor since then, and that was enough of a brains. I had the workings, so I'd take it down to the club. I was in the homebrew computer club, and I was too shy to ever raise my hand and speak in the main meeting, where we would speak up. But afterwards, you could go down and show things on a table and to other people. And I was too shy to speak, but I could, if somebody asked technical questions, I could always answer. So I'd set it up and I'd show people, you can type this in here, and it can cause a bunch of things on the screen to happen. Eventually it was all in color and fanciful, but at first it was just text. And there was a crowd that would look over my shoulder. Now, Steve Jobs didn't know it existed. I wanted to help start this revolution. So I passed out all my designs for free, open source, public domain, no copyright notices, to people in the club so they could build this thing. For $300, you'd have a useful computer instead of spending $400 on an Altair and with switches and lights and having something not useful for anything. You'd have to buy 2 cars worth of money just to get a teletype. So everybody was looking at this, and unlike the movie with Ashton Kutcher, shows Steve Jobs coming finding me in a basement and taking me to a club. What? He'd never been to the club. I'd been there since the first day it started. I took him to the club to see the interest. And he saw all the people around me interested that my computer was so much different than the ones with switches and lights, the old mainframe style. And that's when he said we should start a company. And he'd been coming up with ways to sell my stuff for 5 years, but starting a company, I had one fear. I loved Hewlett-Packard where I worked. I believed in it so much. They believed in engineers. You could be engineers all the way to the bottom. And I was going to be an engineer, never move up an org chart. I don't like politics. Never move up an org chart. Engineer all my life at Hewlett-Packard. I told everyone that. I said, I won't risk my job. So I proposed it to Hewlett-Packard. They turned me down for the first of 5 times for the personal computer. No big computer companies thought it was going to amount to anything. And they had reasons. There are reasons, but all the things personal computers came to do after a year, they couldn't see that it was going to happen. So Steve Jobs and I had to start a company. Now, for 1 year, we kind of got known for the Apple I computer, built very few of them, they're so rare, they sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars now. The Apple I computer, at first, Steve Jobs' idea to start a company, we had no money. We have no savings accounts, nothing. What do? His idea was, well, we'll sell our most valuable things and we'll pay somebody to design a PC board. It's a green board that has a lot of connecting wires. Then you plug your chips in and it works. And we'll build a board for $20 and we'll sell them for $40. No parts on them. Everybody else can get their own parts somewhere, their companies. And shortly after that, the owner of the local store had seen me operated at the club. And he wanted to buy 100 for $500 each. That's $50,000. That was such a huge number. My salary at Hewlett-Packard was $25,000. We're going to have a $50,000 order. I made sure Hewlett-Packard sent my idea around to every one of their divisions, and a vice president signed it off. They weren't interested because I wouldn't do it behind my company's back that I worked for. I was that loyal. And so we had to borrow $5,000 from a friend, and then we would get all the rest of the parts on credit. That means they come out of a closet, the company that makes our PC boards, they come out of a closet and all these employees would stuff them into the board and solder them in, wave solder them in. So we got boards that were completely built with all the parts, and we got it for $250, and we were going to sell it to the local store, the bike shop. Paul Terrell had the vision. We were going to sell it to him for $500 each, and there were no lawyer steps or anything in between. We had 30 days credit to pay for the parts once they came out of the closet, and we'd cycle things and get them delivered in 10 days for cash on delivery. That's what Paul Terrell at the Bite Shop did for us. And so we wouldn't lose money, these Apple Ones. But before we ever delivered an Apple One, I tried to get the first one to go to a woman that would take them into schools and teach young fourth graders, fourth, fifth, sixth graders. That's 9 to 11 years old. She would teach them, 9 to 12 years old, teach them how computers are sets of programs. They're made by people. They aren't smart on their own. They just have rules they follow, and teach them how to use computers. And I wanted to give her the first Apple One. Eliza Loop was her name. She still has it. And Steve Jobs just wouldn't do it. I talked to him for 2 hours driving back from her city in Cotati, California, where she told us what she does. And I couldn't talk him into it, so he made me buy it for $300. I bought the first Apple One, gave it to Eliza Loop. Just what I believed in my heart was the right place for a computer. Anyway, we knew that these Apple Ones were going to be short-term and weren't going to sell many of them, because I'd come up with the most amazing thing ever from a little idea that popped in my head. That was the Apple II computer. When I was back at Atari designing Breakout, 4 days and nights, no sleep, I thought, wouldn't it be neat if someday these arcade games were color? They weren't. What if they were color? And then I started thinking, as a color television engineer, what sort of signals went on a wire, plus and minus sine waves? I said, what if I took the ones and zeros out of a computer and put them on a wire? Well, 1 is plus, 0 is minus. And I put them on at the right speed. I knew how televisions were designed. It violated the rules of the mathematics of color television, mathematics of things like sine waves and formulas. But it was really easy. For $0, instead of spending $5,000 on the parts that could manipulate blue, green, and reds on a color TV, here it was. You just take a number out of a computer, put it on the wire into the TV, and every TV would think it was color, although it violated all the math rules. Oh my gosh, I knew that would work. And that's why our first logo from Apple was 6 colors. Nobody could ever expected color to come to these small computers or color to come to arcade games yet. The Apple II computer, which we showed off before we even delivered an Apple I. The Apple II computer was the first time ever arcade games were color. But it was more important, it was the first time ever arcade games were software. You could sit down, a 9-year-old, in a program called BASIC, it's so simple, could write a decent game in one day. Whereas before that, the games were hardware, the ones I designed, like at Atari even, and you got hundreds of chips and thousands of wires, and a skilled engineer that knows what's on those wires designs things so that they show up on a TV doing the right things. And that would take sometimes a man-year to design a new game prototype you thought of. So that meant games could be done by a 9-year-old in one night. This Apple II was going to shock the world. And it was so good, we knew we'd sell 1,000 a month, but we couldn't afford to build 1,000 a month. We had no money. So that's when Steve Jobs started looking around at other companies that might buy in, Commodore and Atari. Atari was too busy with the upcoming home Pong game they had. And Commodore decided, that people don't want a nice fancy computer. Very few parts. I designed the best WAS systems I ever did to shrink parts of the timing and shrink parts of the memory and shrink everything down, and the slot assignments. An operating system that just came with the computer, not on a disk. Didn't have to be read in as a program. It was in there. It was just incredible. But Commodore said, people don't want that. They just want a simple, cheap one. And they had a marketing guy that wanted to do theirs. Their head of engineering quit. He came to Apple not long after that, and he said our product was the right one. He wanted to be with us. So he came in and joined us, and he started running European Apple, your Apple. And I loved designing the European version because the televisions are different over there. And I did PAL ones too. Did an Arabic one where the words go from right to left, and you have to add extra characters at the end of a word if it had a certain ending letter. Oh, I loved those. I just love those products. I did. People walk in the door. It wasn't even like they don't go to the top of Apple. They just walk in my door and, can you do this? Yeah. We were that small at the start. No bad publicity. All the publicity in the world for these little startups with 2 people two young kids starting up, and here's what they have. It was taking over the world because there were no competitors. None of the big computer companies thought it was going anywhere. So they weren't out there trying to put out their own messages or even do the same things we were doing. So we had it kind of easy. And anyway, the Apple II was so big. How will we raise the money? And we had a venture capitalist, and he said, how many are you going to sell? I said, 1 million. He says, how do you figure that? I said, well, there's 1 million ham radio operators, and this is bigger than ham radio. Nobody could deny it, but it wasn't business talk. It wasn't the sort of marketing talk they wanted to hear. So the venture capitalist kind of turned us down, but he did introduce us to Mike Markkula, who is still alive. He became our third most important partner. He invested the money to build 1,000 of them. He was the adult in the room. He explained to Steve Jobs and I who you hire in a tech company and what their responsibilities would be and their roles, and introduced us to a couple people to interview. And here's what a president does, and you'll need some attorneys, and you'll need operations people to build it. So he was guiding the show, and he was in-house. He had an office right in with us. He was, I think, president. I don't think we even had CEO word then. And Mike Markkula really is the one that formulated the company, told us how to be professional, to hire people that were professional at what they did and knew their job. And where you're doing an introduction to your computer, you wear suits, that sort of stuff. But he gave us a lot of good guidance to doing things the right way. Steve Jobs and I were different. I had built this whole computer. It was all mine. Nobody helped me coming up with the ideas for it or anything. And like I said, I was shy. I didn't want to talk to press or anything. Just put me in a back room. I want to keep designing products for Apple. And Steve Jobs wanted to be very famous in the world from his early days. So he took over the role and presented himself to the press as the brain of all personal computers, this upcoming market where you could own your own computer. And he presented himself that way constantly. But he kept trying to come up with computers of his own. Here's what the world needs. And the Apple III failed. The Lisa failed. The Apple III failed because of marketing. The Apple III Lisa failed because Steve didn't know computer hardware, software, didn't know what the price would be. It would cost that much. And the Macintosh was our hardest failure ever. Almost sunk the company. Built a factory to build 80,000 a month, and we were selling 500 a month. Our stock dropped so fast, and we had to save the company. But anyway, the Apple II, at first, okay, it's selling a little bit. It's a little game machine. People are starting to learn you can buy this computer and make games on it. No big time money, not yet, like millions. And then after a year, two things happened. Up until then, your programs were on cassette tapes. If you wanted a program to manage your checkbook, you grabbed a cassette tape called Checkbook, put it in a cassette player, you played it. The tones would go into the computer, and the computer would have the program. Kind of shaky, it wasn't very reliable. But after a year, went to a staff meeting, and Apple was going to be allowed into the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'd always wanted to see Las Vegas. You hear about it in movies. Oh my gosh. But Apple was only going to send 3 people. Mike Markkula, who was marketing, Steve Jobs, who was Steve Jobs, and Gene Carter was our sales guy. Only 3 marketing people, and I'm too shy to say, I'm a founder. I want to go to Las Vegas. I want to see it. So I raised my hand at the staff meeting, and I said, what if we have a floppy drive, a disk drive? I had never worked with any disk hardware or software in my life. I just knew how to look at any problem and find solutions. And Mike Markkula said yes. And I'm thinking, if I can develop an entire floppy disk connector, a board called the interface, to a floppy disk where you can type run checkbook or run color math or other things like that, if I can do that in 2 weeks, they'll have to take me to the show. I'll be the only one that knows how the floppy disk works. And that's exactly how it went. I worked every single day and night, Christmas, New Year's, all through waiting for the Consumer Electronics Show. Got down there the night of the show. I had a high school programmer named Randy Wigginton helping me. We got a room, the 2 of us, in some little dinky motel off on the side of things, and we'd walk all down the strip in Las Vegas, go to the convention center, finished up the code by 6 in the morning, Then I copied it onto the wrong disk onto the new one, the blank disk onto the new one, and had to redo it. But it was all in my head by then, so I got it redone in the morning. And Randy and I, that was so much fun. Talk about pranks again. I mean, I carried my tools with me. Don't worry about time. And I carried my tools with me. So I take apart a telephone in those days. You could switch all the numbers on the touch-tone phone around. So instead of 1, 2, 3 horizontally, I made 1, 2, 3 vertically. And I put it back together in that format. So everybody wonder, why is it not working? Also, they had a movie in your hotel room. I had designed the first system like that. I said, they have to, in this little box here, they have to have your room number encoded. Took the box apart because I had my tools, changed the little dip switch inside, and we never got billed for the movies. But, and Randy he was a high school kid, but I taught him how to play craps and he won $35. Too young for a casino, but he did it. You remember things like that. I do remember that we did somehow introduce the floppy disk. That was a huge change, but the bigger change came at the same time. And it wasn't from us. PCs sat there languishing for where are they going to be used for? How are they going to be worth their money? And the first useful program came out, software. The first spreadsheet program came out, could only run on the Apple II. It was called VisiCalc. And it made the cost of the computer totally worthwhile. Businessmen would go into a store, work on a computer for an hour or two, setting up on the spreadsheet months, January, February, March, April, May, setting up all the expense areas and income areas. They'd make a little change in January and see the results in December. They just had to buy it. They had to buy an Apple II and more memory to hold a bigger spreadsheet and a bigger display card and VisiCalc, the software. And that really changed the whole world. From then on, we were going to be one of the hugely successful companies of all time. And the market, the personal computer market, was firmly established because managers could go into their big companies like IBM, and one manager could just type his own numbers in to a spreadsheet and do all the arrangements and get it done quickly. Whereas before that, you had to apply to a department. I want these records from all of our business transactions. And you'd wait for, a few days and you'd get a printout and you'd say, oh no, I want it a little different to change it. No, having your personal computer really made things change, even for big business.
Tell me about this. What was the point where you started to deviate from Steve Jobs' philosophy?
When we started Apple.
Oh, when you started Apple.
But no, we were still best friends forever, right to his death. I mean, never, ever. I just have a thing. I never had an enemy in my life. I will only be good to people because my shyness taught me to want to be liked by everyone. No conflict. Don't want to ever get in conflicts and arguments. Never did that with Steve Jobs, despite some movies kind of trying to make a deal of it. So he wanted to be big businessman, well-known in the world for my product. And I just wanted to be an unknown engineer working on more and more clever things, floppy disks and all those different countries and making the disk software faster, slower. I just wanted to keep doing that. Printer interfaces that were great. And all my interfaces were real tiny, very few parts. So, and Dave and Steve Jobs didn't want me around because I might be competition to him. So he had me move to a far off, way down the hallway, a little office smaller than the building area we had. So I could do my stuff all there, which I liked anyway. And I was working on operating systems and better basics. But if it took 2 weeks, he got nervous and he'd hire somebody else to do it. So anyway, he was in a part of the world that I deliberately didn't want to be. Now, when Apple went public, that was another thing. We had our IPO, and all of a sudden 3 of us had our names on paper as founders with founders stock, and we were worth infinite money forever. Just that much money. It was unbelievable. I had never sought money. I started this company. I didn't want to start a business. I didn't want to start an industry. I didn't want to make money. I wanted other engineers to see my clever work, to look over and say, where was his brain? I wanted them to respect my brain. And now I had all this money. I hadn't really sought. And this nice thing, okay, I could buy a home. But I thought, what about these other people that were so early in the Homebrew Computer Club even? Would I have been as great if they weren't praising me? So I gave huge amounts of my stock, tens of millions of dollars worth, to 5 early people. And then I sold a whole ton of stock to the employees of the company at a pre-IPO price. And they all basically got a house out of the deal. But I did it because they're all working for the same company. Why should 3 of us have infinite, so much more wealth than we'd ever want? And then I started donating to a lot of museums in the city of my birth, San Jose, California. And I built a lot of those things up, and the city honored me with a street named after me. And these are the things I'm never, ever go back and change to have money. Never. I'm so glad of who I am, of all the people in the world. And I've stayed true. I've never sold out, and I've stayed true to my beliefs.
What was the point where you and Apple were separated?
Okay. The first time it's called separating, I had a plane crash in 1981. I was the pilot. And I had a type of amnesia called anterograde amnesia, forward amnesia. I'm not forming memories. I can have talk with you, but if I come back in 10 minutes, I have no memory of it. They weren't formed into permanent memories. The doctors didn't spot this in me, the hospital. My parents, the relatives, they didn't spot this. Nobody knew, and yet it's fairly common for car crashes and airplane crashes. Nobody spotted it. They just thought I was weird. For 5 weeks, I didn't know that I'd put a dog in a kennel for 5 weeks. I'd never do that. Or that I was missing a tooth. I didn't know I was missing a tooth for 5 weeks. And one day, I remember going down to the Macintosh group. I guess my wife at the time took me there. And I was talking to a friend, Andy Hertzfeld, and he said something about the plane crash. He referred to a plane crash. And I said, I'm in the plane crash dream. And in a dream, you're allowed to turn around and walk any direction you want. I was about to turn around on him and walk the other way. I said, no, I'll play by the rules of this dream. And had some small conversation. I can never remember it now. But that night, in bed with my fiance, I asked, did I have a plane crash or was it a dream? I joke a lot about everything, and everybody knows that I can be very off track. She said, it's a dream. You're having a dream. She thought that I was teasing her, that I didn't know whether I had a crash. I didn't know. I'm trying to figure it out. Did I have a crash? I could remember every detail of the day, right up to reaching for the throttle in my plane. I can't remember pushing it. There's a reason your memory, when you have a crash like that, your memory drops out about 30 seconds before, because it hasn't lingered long enough to become permanent. And I couldn't find anything. I felt my body. Do I have any signs of a plane crash? And then I went back and I said, wait a minute. When you're flying a plane, small plane, you never forget a landing. I was going to land in Santa Catalina that day. I never landed in Santa Catalina. And I jerked up and I knew that I'd had a plane crash. And all of a sudden, half of my mind was forming memories, half wasn't. And I could tell the difference, and I could tell where I'd been. I was so amazed that a mind could work like that. And then my parents or somebody set me up to see a psychologist the next day. I guess they'd set it up already. I didn't know. I went down and I told him what had happened, that I wasn't forming memories. Now I am. And he said, that's because you're manic depressive. I said, what? I don't have these big high and low states. I'm real even keel. That's how I brought myself up in life. And he said, yeah, that's because it starts when you're 30. I was 30. What a quack. What a quack. Wouldn't even listen to me about a thing that's really common in psychiatry. It's called long-term memory, short-term memory. So anyway, I called Steve Jobs up right away. After I came out of amnesia, I called him up in a day or two and I said, this is my last chance to go back to college for my 4th year. See, I only had 3 years of college. I was a good student, but I could go back and get my degree. And I said, the Macintosh group, which I was on, is in good shape. They're creative people and I love them all. And so that was, and Steve said, fine. So I didn't leave Apple as far as employees or paycheck. I still got a paycheck because things would come up that I would participate in Apple events or go to clubs around the country or the world that invited me. One time they invited me to be a keynote speaker at Christmas in New Zealand, Wellington, New Zealand. So I went because I just love speaking to clubs because they're my people. Those are my people. And Apple never was involved, never paid for a cent of this, never knew that I was doing this, mostly around the country. And So I was being paid, and I went back to Berkeley, and had my last year of college there. I went back as a psychology major, taking all the majors for psychology students because I wanted to study the brain more after having gone through that, study memory. And I got over it. By the time it was over, I'd had this idea to put on a huge Woodstock-style concert, which I did in Southern California. Set the theme for today's big concerts in this country. Showed that there was a market for it. I lost a lot of money. And we had to spend like maybe 50 million of today's dollars just to groom the amphitheater, right? Maybe even more. It was a huge undertaking, but it was successfully liked. It was liked, even though it lost me money. And it was very important to do things first. And there were a lot of firsts at that concert, a lot of firsts, including the first space bridge with the USSR. USSR and United States were in a Cold War. Cold War, as bad as could be. And we had the first concert ever in the United States with a big video display. We made contact with people in Moscow, television people. NBC from the United States was going to go over for the 1980 Olympics in Moscow, or 82 Olympics, and they got canceled because Russia invaded Afghanistan. They didn't get canceled, we canceled. But our equipment was over there to make satellite connections to broadcast the Olympics. We hooked up with their TV people and our TV people. We worked with phone companies, get permission for a phone call to set things up. And when it came on the screen, it worked. We did the first three, I did myself, the first three space bridges with the Soviet Union. And of course, when I announced what was going on, when it came on our screen, Bill Graham was supposed to go up and announce it in a microphone. Bill Graham, the rock promoter. And he didn't. I ran across the stage and he's looking at some displays coming from Russia. And he says, "Steve, this is coming from Southern California." I knew the truth. So I went up to the microphone and announced it. There was a lot of booing. You know, Soviet Union was like Al-Qaeda or something, just horrible in those days. But it was a start. It was before Perestroika. Eventually, I would put on the first concert in Russia, in Moscow, in a stadium with top Soviet groups and top US groups. But by then it was in Perestroika. And the very first one, they did an hour TV show on Showtime about it. And that was Russia, doing things with Russia to get us closer and closer to peace. I believed in talking on the space bridges, person to person. All of a sudden, you realize how similar you are. And the propaganda of the governments just dissolves. So I worked on personal diplomacy efforts, put a lot of money and efforts and computers into it. And eventually, one year, I spent the money, all the money, to send 340 low-level Russians. I insisted they not be like principals in schools, they'd be teachers. Send low-level Russians to the United States for 2 weeks, traveling and visiting homes of Rotary Club members. And I spent the whole thing. I mean, that was important to me to try to seek peace everywhere in the world. And I forget what we were started with.
Let's get into the inner genius. How would you guide the younger generation who don't know who they are, where they're going?
Well, first of all, no matter if other people kind of tell you, like teachers, you get a low grade or something. Oh, I'll tell you, you got to start when you're young. And the problem is, if you're already several grades along, years along in school, and you kind of haven't been too well in the class, maybe you're in the middle. The best thing in the world to find, if you can find somebody who would go back and work things from the start. Mathematics is that way. I had to do that once with my own son, who was the brightest math kid in one of his schools. In the next school, he was the only one from his prior school to get into calculus. And if you don't get into calculus, algebra, you don't get into algebra in 6th grade, the formats in the United States are if you don't get into algebra in 6th grade, the path you go on doesn't get you up to the AP courses, which give you 5 points for an A instead of 4 points for an A. You can't possibly get there through high school. So it kind of turns you easy. And the teacher said he was getting an F. He wasn't doing any work or anything. Said maybe if he did something, came through a little bit, he could get a D. Huh? My son, he'd been the most brilliant one in math and with everyone around him and best programmer on computers in my computer classes. So I talked to him and told him how important it was. And then a week later, I asked him, "Have you been studying yet?" No, he's not doing it. So we came with Christmas break for 2 weeks. And I got the same book from the school for myself. as Jesse had. And he liked this game, Magic the Gathering, that had started. It was in its early days. And so I bought some Magic the Gathering decks, and we'd play Magic the Gathering together at the table. And then we would read, both of us, not to each other, we'd read half a chapter. And then there were some questions halfway through the chapter, and we'd answer them privately. And then we always compared. We always had the same answers. We had 100% through the entire book, as it turns out. And after a half chapter, we'd play Magic the Gathering for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Then we would go through the second half of the chapter and answer the questions at the end ourselves independently on paper and compare. And always 100%. And then they had a program you could write at the end of each chapter. And his class didn't do the programming. The teacher said it's designed for 9th graders, not 6th graders. Oh, he wrote every single program too that was at the end of the chapters, and went through all from the very start of algebra all the way through. And he's getting 100% on every set of questions. He had to go back to school. The vacation ended. Back to school, one chapter behind his class. And they had a quiz, and he got an A-. And then the next week, he got the highest score. He's up with his class, got the highest score on all the tests from then on. And he wound up at the end of middle school, 8th grade. He got the math award of the whole school. It was a turnaround, but it was believing in, sometimes sometimes you have to go back. Schools don't have a way built in to go back. You almost need a private instructor to go back and take you through if you want to do well. Also, if you feel you love something in life, and it might be you discovered chemistry or you discovered algebra, you want to be really good at it, you don't have to do just what they say. So like when I was in school, they would assign all the odd problems from 1 to 37. Do the odd problems at the end of a chapter. I loved math so much. I would do every single problem all the way up to 50, odds and evens, every single one of them. Sometimes if you really love something, and boy, so I got the math awards in my schools doing that. And that helps. Education, almost always, if the more you have, the better. But you'll find a lot of success stories like Steve Jobs that didn't have really great education and still made it. So it's not the only thing. You've got to think for yourself, and you've got to try to come up with ideas of what you're good at. If you're slightly good at anything, it might be carpentry, it might be chemistry, you like it, you value what you're good at. So, don't just take what they tell you. Here's what you have to study, this chapter in a book. Feel free to go online, get more information, go to a library, get books in the old days, and learn as much as you want. You could, this is an exciting thing. And the other people don't have to do what you're doing. I was lucky. I was shy, but the shyness said, I don't have to do what everyone else is doing, because then I'm competing with them directly. I could do all my computer design, teaching myself electronics, building my own projects out of school on my own. Doesn't matter if it's not going anywhere. A lot of people would say, this is not going to take you very far. Or what you're interested in isn't going to be worth much money. You should be a dentist or a lawyer or something. And I just say, no, don't listen to that. Don't listen to that. If you like it, go with it. Feel your heart. You got to follow your heart. So many occasions in my own life, I found following your heart led to very good things. That's what you feel you should do. And don't believe other people saying you're doing bad. I remember when we were starting with personal computers, and I designed the Apple I, and all that, being told, well, if you had to pay yourself salaries for the hours you spent on this and that, you'd be losing money. And who cares? We're doing what we want to do. We feel it's got some meaning to us. Yeah. Also be very honest. Don't try to say something because the words sound good to others. You got to be honest with yourself. Say something just totally the truth that you believe in. And sure, it might be a little weak on a subject, of how certain chemicals combine or something like that, or some physics, how planets go. You might have your own idea. You say it what you believe. Somebody else that has more knowledge could come along and say, no, look at this. Here's how things really are more completely. And just, I don't know, believe in what you know, say it honestly. It'll show to other people that you're not trying to impress them and make up words. I'm just really against that. People that, I want to make things up that sound good, even if you're raising money for a startup. And keep in mind, you might someday have your own company. You might actually get a lot from it, even wealth, and Startups are the greatest thing you can ever do in the world, even for your country's economics. How much money's going on in the economy? Startups create new types of business that didn't exist before, new categories, and it's like additional new wealth and not just substitute just a new version of the old wealth. And that's why it's so important. Startup is the hardest thing in your life. When you're in a startup, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I could actually achieve something. I could do this. And you have visions where it could go, and it's going to go somewhere good, but you work so hard. You work day and night. If you're really tight into it, it's the hardest work in your life, really hard, and you feel it. But when you look back, it's the most fun you ever had in your life. You're doing something for the sake of it, and don't force everything to have a price tag. Do some things that you feel like for free. Also, if you're doing something that you're good at, maybe heading towards a company, but you have some friends and they don't quite know as much as you. They're not quite as smart, or they're younger. Help them. Do everything you can to help them come up the ladder of learning and being with you. And don't try to shove them down. Be a good person. Also, here's another thing. You might be good at some particular thing. Maybe it's mathematics, maybe it's engineering, maybe it's building things. You can be good at your own things, but to have a company, a little startup someday, you're going to have other people around you contributing their parts to make it work, and respect the other disciplines. Your discipline might be mathematics and engineering. Another person's discipline might be business, running the business to make money. Another person might have a discipline of marketing, knowing what is worth how much money and what features should be. Respect them all. Listen to them all. Don't think you're the only one. And you'll go a lot further. And always be well liked. How far you go in any business, my dad told me this when I was very young. How far you go is largely based on how well liked you are. And I decided I was shy, so I had it lucky, but don't ever get into arguments with people, offend them. I'd be afraid to have to talk to people in that way back then. And just don't offend anybody. Be nice and say the best things you can about everyone.
If there was one secret to turning thoughts into reality, what was that? What's that secret that you've learned in your whole journey?
The secret of turning thoughts into reality. Everybody has thoughts, especially if you're thinking about like what products would make your life better. Everything you have, you stumble on something. Oh, I could make this make it turn left instead of right. It'd be more convenient, it'd be more natural. Everybody has ideas. How do you turn them into reality? It's not going to be in academic education. It's going to be in experience and actually being a builder. There are a lot of people out there that are builders, and they get ideas. They hook little parts together or things together, maybe in the garage, maybe some woodwork or metal pieces, and they make something for themselves. And every once in a while, you can't guarantee you're going to stumble on a winner idea. But every once in a while, it's, whoa, this really worked out well. And then you start showing it to other people and get a claim for it. So, the building part's the hard one. Like when I'm doing a lot of interviews where I go, I always respect the audio people and the video people so much because they're doing what I did with Apple. I wasn't just somebody had great ideas for what a computer could be that were advanced in the world. I wasn't just the engineer that could design how to build them on paper and test them and all that. I was the builder. I hooked up every wire, every chip to make these things that I could take down to a club and show off that became the Apple I and Apple II computers and other projects. I was a builder. So I look at the people doing the actual work deserve just so much credibility from me. They're so important. I'm so glad. I feel better about myself for having actually done what's considered technician work, maybe a lower paid status of work than engineering. But that's...
If you could say one thing to Steve, if he was in this room with you today, what would you say to Steve Jobs?
If I could say something to Steve, I would just say how good a friend he was, and how wonderful. Remember, we never argued. And near his death, I told him, "You aren't judged by what you don't do after you die. You're judged by what you did when you die. And you were the greatest tech leader ever, and you changed and improved my life so much." And I go back, I don't think that Steve Jobs wanted Apple or Steve Jobs 2 when he returned. I go back to Steve Jobs 0 and his voice and how he talked and did things back then, and just fun, two fun kids. I go back that far too.
When you look at Apple today, which is a $3 trillion market cap company, what do you see? Is it still the vision that you created? Is it carried in that way?
It's actually not what Steve Wozniak created.
No,
It got run. Apple today, when I started, Apple built nice products that would help people. And, until the internet came, that was true. After the internet, everyone started wanting to get in the act to control the people who had these computers, or now iPhones, smartphones. They wanted to control it, and you have to subscribe to everything and go through their channel. Just yesterday in my car, I wanted to tell the car, it has a speech thing, to open the mirrors or open the glove compartment. I spoke it, and it said, "Oh, can't reach." It wasn't on the internet. Couldn't reach the internet. Why? If I'm in my car, can't I speak a command to open my mirrors? Why does it have to go through the cloud? Long time ago, that happened to me on Apple when they went about the Apple 4, something like that. The Siri came. Siri came to Apple. It's a smart assistant. And up till then, I could actually tell my phone, call Janet. No Siri, no Siri. And the phone just could recognize the words and call Janet. When Siri came, I'd call Janet. I'd wait and I'd wait and I'd wait. And sometimes it'd come back that it couldn't reach the server or the internet or whatever. No, and you have to get a subscription to everything these days. And I do anything I can to try to avoid that. And it's not a happy world, because then they own you, and they make decisions for you that you wouldn't have made yourself. My car, I can set the temperature where I like it, go walk the dogs, and come back to the car, and it's all different. Someplace I don't like it, and entertainment systems not taken care. No, and then when they have an upgrade, very often an important button like defog the windshield, you want to do it right away. Where did it go? I've got to find some menu it's in, or open the glove box. Now it's in a menu. The horn, can't even honk the horn. Oh, we decided we'd put it on the screen as another touch screen on the wheel. It's on the wheel that you can honk the horn. Can't ever find it, especially if you're already turning part way. I don't like a lot of parts of what the technology world went to since the internet made the cloud possible and made control of you that way possible. Was not what I set out to do originally. I just wanted to empower humans. So somebody's going to do it. Somebody's going to come through with, for example, a social media that's a program you get. You don't even have to buy it, maybe. You just get it, install it, and all of you wind up talking to each other, seeing your timelines and your friends list and everything, and don't have to go through a big central server that controls you and sets the price.
How important has Janet been in your life, and in your overall positive outlook on life?
I am just so lucky. I'm the luckiest person in the world. We do things together, and she does so much to help me. I can't even put down in words. I'd never, ever have hoped for that. I didn't think I'd ever get married again, and I just lucked out. Janet does so much. I have an occupation. I'm a public speaker. That's where our money comes from for our home and our dogs and our family. And Janet does so much work to figure out even, which plane flights will reach what cities, working with the people, setting up the details, how it's going to go. And I would never want to do that. I'm just lucky.
If there was one thing you could say to Janet that you'd never said to her, what would you say?
I love you more than yesterday. Oh, no, I say that every day. Happy anniversary. Today's our anniversary.
Really?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's our anniversary every day.
We celebrate an anniversary every day.
Okay.
We love each other so much. So today is 6,173 days we've been married.
Does that mean the stakes are on you guys today?
It means that if we go to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, they're going to give us free dessert.
Okay, so what is one of the most powerful ways to create for inventors, people like yourselves who are, geniuses, who understand that they need to bring a product into the world? but maybe they don't have other aspects of the things right, as in like the marketing side or the business side. How do you create something?
Well, first of all, you'd better, before you try to raise money, don't say, I'll have an idea, write it down, I'll go to venture capital, I'll raise money, I'll hire engineers anywhere in the world. Have the engineers, if you're not one, if you're just a business person in a university, have an engineer with you thinking up, engineers solve so many problems, or a mathematician, and try to have clever ideas on what we could do a little bit more or a little bit more effectively, a little bit more efficiently with less cost. Have them decide for you. But then before you go raising money for something, create some kind of prototype. It could be just a virtual screen, a program you wrote that somebody can actually reach out with their hand, touch, take some actions, and see what the results will be. And have that, because then whatever you came up with, you'll own more of it. And that makes you more motivated to be successful with it when it's yours. You'll own more of it, and when you get money from venture capitalists, you'll own a greater percentage.
If you could go back and do one thing differently, what would you do?
Nothing. I knew that I had a good head.
Could you start off with, if I could go
All right. Yeah. If I could go back in my life, I think about this whenever it comes up. No, I wouldn't change a thing. Not a thing, because I know at those instances, my brain was working very well. I knew it all the way through, and I made some decisions that are very strange. Like I gave an example, instead of having counters count up to 60, have them count down, because you get a signal when they hit 0 to reload and count down again. And it saves it cuts the chip count in half. I had a, even while other people might say, no, this is not the way, it's sort of standard, I'd rather have things more the way I was taught. I always had a good brain, and I knew I was making the right decisions for the right reasons.
What would your message be to someone who doesn't believe in themselves or their potential? The young kid who's got ideas.
There's, as far as a person that may not believe in themselves, I think that's not really the way to say it, but maybe they don't believe they're going to go very far because they've heard all these other stories that have so many aspects that are different than their own life. And I would say, no, look how many of us, this whole personal computer era on, so many of the greatest companies today were started by people who didn't even have a college degree. But they had to believe in themselves. They had to believe they had something and willing to work hard. The number of hours you put into something, they have this idea of 10,000 hours. The number of hours you put into something determines how good you'll be at it. Not even what grades you got in school.
What kind of legacy do you want to leave, not just in tech, but in human progress? What do you want to be remembered by?
Well, kindness and caring. Kindness and caring, and
Could you say,
wanting.
like to be remembered?
Sure. Okay, yeah. As far as my own legacy, what I would like to be remembered by more than anything else is kindness, caring, and honesty. One thing I'd even tell any young person, be as honest as you can about everything. Don't try to think, what should I be saying? Just say what it is, what you know.
What helps you get through the tough times, personally or professionally? So, like, when you were starting up with Apple, and even now when you're going through a lot of tough times, how do you balance those tough energies?
I was always kind of in between. Whenever I thought of an idea to build something, I saw in my head the parts. I was a builder. I knew the lumber. I usually worked up from the lumber to the architecture. Whereas a lot of people teach, come up with great architecture, and we'll figure people that know the lumber will build it. Oh no, I was both, and that was very, very helpful in everything I did.
How can people tap into their genius, and what are the keys to creativity and creation?
Everyone will tell you that everybody has their own genius in their own way. And the trouble is, genius doesn't get recognized unless you, make a lot of money or have some big success. There's a lot of ways that it doesn't get recognized. Look how many people work for a company like Apple. Many of those are doing genius things, maybe on a small little level, certain things work in a certain way. They're all needed. So you get recognized by genius, you kind of have to do something very rare and be the only one doing it. Do what I did, I say. You want to be recognized, your genius? Don't do what everyone else is doing. then you're going to be compared to them instantly. Maybe you're going to be graded with them or something. Go off and do some things you think of on your own that would be kind of cool that don't exist yet, that people aren't doing right now.
What are the keys to creativity and creation?
I wish I knew. For me, there were so many lucky things in my life, just that I stumbled in past without realizing. I didn't say, "What should I do to be creative?" I wound up there. Like I said, but somewhere by 18 and 23, you can talk to these people that got really great grades at the university in engineering and know how to do certain projects, but some of them aren't inventors. That just have this desire to do strange things, talk to their friends. What if this existed? And, little feedback, always chase the interesting things in life, meaning interesting products that come out and other things, or that are possible, and follow the interesting people, even if they're a little bit misbehaving, a little bit criminals, a little bit rule breakers. If they're interesting, the ones they make movies about. That's what inspired me all my life to I don't know, want to do things that are different.
Cool. Last question. I just want to be mindful of time. What made Apple so successful today? Like, what do you think is the recipe that made it so successful?
Well, it didn't come from me. I'll say that. I mean, sure, I started Apple. My product, the Apple II, was the only money Apple made for the first 10 years. There would not be a company without my product. That was it. That's what made the company. After that time, most people don't know those first 10 years and how important it was. And especially with publicity, Steve Jobs, and business and marketing. The reason Apple is so huge today is really due to business thinking of the people that run the company. And it's not, how can we build the greatest, newest product that does something very different? It's not so life-changing as it used to be. Sometimes it is out of Apple, but read the recent book, Apple in China. Apple in China. You'll be amazed what you learn about how they built this hugeness.